Hello Hastings, welcome to an In Studio. I'm Tom Wright, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to Carly and David Bowers here in studio. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carly and David here have quite the story, a story of facing a tragedy and overcoming that tragedy to be here today to talk about it. But before we, now I'll explain real quickly that the tragedy took place way back in 1999 and involved a horrific fire accident with David here. And we're going to talk about that, but David, let's talk about life before the accident and tell us about your family life and what you guys were up to. And I know you had kids, so let's hear about the before.
Just before the accident, we were living in Southeast Texas, the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. We had 2 children. Samantha was 9, or turning 9, and Nathan was 2. I worked for a company called Praxair, produced industrial gases, oxygen, nitrogen, and argon. Carly and I had been married for 5 years at that point.
And then came the accident, August 20th, 1999. I'm sure that's a day you won't forget. Tell us whatever you're comfortable telling us, please, from that day. What happened?
We were in the process of starting a new plant up inside our facility. We'd been working some extra hours, and I'd been told to take the day off because things were just about wrapped up. So that day I went in anyway, had stayed at home in the morning and had gone in close to lunchtime. And when I got there, they were getting ready to isolate a section of oxygen piping. So I had, and my supervisor, Clyde, we had worked together to start the isolation process of this piping. So we had worked on that, and while I was standing outside waiting to vent the oxygen off, noticed some sparks coming off of the piping and realized the oxygen was causing the pipe itself to catch on fire and to burn. So I took a step off of the step ladder I was standing on, just got a few feet away from it when that pipe just completely released. So there was a flash fire, reached temperatures of 3,000 to 5,000 degrees. Fortunately, only lasted 3 to 4 seconds. So it was very quick. I stopped, dropped, and rolled, and was just incredibly angry at that point because I had been very safety conscious, and had no idea how badly hurt I was, but knew that, or was thinking maybe when I had set up in the rocks and didn't have any clothes on anymore because they'd been burnt off, that maybe I was going to have to spend the night or 2 in the hospital, and our daughter's birthday was in 3 days, was August 23rd. So was just incredibly angry, and in the course of those few seconds, was frustrated that nobody had come out from the control room yet.
Seemed like an eternity, he said.
Yes,
I'm sure.
But it was
It really
only
wasn't.
it was only a few seconds. So I had gotten up and walked over to the control room where the rest of the guys were at, and was trying to get my boots off. I had leather Red Wing boots on, so was trying to get them off because the leather itself was hot and it was starting to burn my feet.
Wow. You were able to get up and walk over, though, to this control room? What's the distance? What was the distance to do that?
It's not very far, maybe a couple hundred feet.
That's far enough.
He stayed awake and he was giving commands to his coworkers saying, I think I need an ambulance, call 911, could you get me a blanket, could
Yeah.
you?
Give me a bucket of water.
He was awake through all of it.
Did anybody see this happen, this explosion?
Nobody was directly outside at the time of the explosion, but they were there very quickly.
Wow.
They brought a one of the igloo coolers of water out and poured it on me, and fortunately I was still very angry at that point. And one of the guys came out and came around a piece of equipment and started praying for me. And it was just a quick, simple prayer of Jesus, please be with David. But it allowed me to refocus. So instead of being angry at God, just angry at everything, that it was well with my soul.
Wow.
And didn't make any bargaining chips with God of, if you'll get me through this, I'll become missionary in Africa for the rest of my life type of a thing. It was just, okay, God, if I can stay, I've got a wife and children I'd love to stay with, but if it's my time, I'm okay with that too.
Wow. Were you conscious this whole time?
Yes. I was conscious until at the emergency room where they sedated me for the helicopter ride.
Did you feel any pain at all? Was there any?
The prior to getting in the ambulance, I think it was a lot of adrenaline was masking the pain. But the way to the emergency room, the pain was getting worse and worse.
We spoke, we keep in touch with the EMT that responded to David's accident, and we were just with Jay a few months ago, and he said that he gave David all the morphine that was on the ambulance on the trip there,
Wow.
just to try to keep him comfortable.
Let's go to you, Carly. Let's hear the story of you getting the news and your
Yes.
reaction.
Yeah, I was at home. I was a part-time youth director at our church. We lived in Southeast Texas at the time, and I was working at our home office. Samantha was at school, and Nathan was 2 at the time, and so was down for his afternoon nap, and so trying to get as much work done as you possibly can when your little one's sleeping. And the phone rang, and I rushed to it so that it wouldn't wake Nathan up so that I could keep working, and it was an emergency room nurse telling me that I needed to get to the hospital as soon as I possibly could, that David had been in an explosion. And so I hung up the phone, and no sooner was there a knock on our front door, and it was David's boss and his wife. They had tried really hard to get to our house before I got that phone call because they didn't want me to get the phone call, so they were just a few seconds too late. But and then his boss took me to the hospital. And then his wife stayed and got Nathan and went and picked up Samantha and brought them to the hospital.
What was going through your mind? What were you like, panic or just silent shock? I mean, what was your reaction? How were you
Yeah,
feeling?
it was just overwhelming. Panic, probably a little bit, shock. Couldn't remember where my shoes were, where my purse was, what I needed to do. On the way there, tried to make phone calls, but it seemed like nobody was home or answering their phones at the time. And so got to the emergency room, and we were escorted right away into David's room. Got to see him for just a split 30 seconds, maybe a minute. We were able to say that we loved each other. And then in the next breath, David told me to take care of our children. And then was escorted out of his room while they prepped him for the helicopter ride to the burn unit, because the local hospital just wasn't able to take care of him.
I had been told by the emergency room doctor that I had a high mortality injury, that I wouldn't survive. So I told her to get busy because it wasn't my time yet, but knew that very likely that might have been the last time I'd ever talked to Carly.
The kids, you mentioned the kids. How'd they get the news, and how were they coping with it, handling it?
Well, Samantha was 9. She was at school, and then a friend of the family picked her up, and she was just told that Dad was in an accident. So she talks today about how she thought Dad was just in a car accident or an accident at work, not a big deal, kind of a thing, until she got there. Nathan was 2, pretty oblivious to everything. That came a little bit later when we were reunited a little bit. Several months later, Nathan got to see David for the first time, and that was very awkward. Nathan didn't recognize David. It was a very difficult situation. Didn't want anything to do with him for quite some time. That was a process.
Well, yeah. So tell me what took place after the immediate trip to the hospital, and then now to the burn unit. At the burn unit, take us through that part of the recovery, and what maybe take us through a typical day of how that went.
I'll let you do it.
Yeah, he doesn't remember a whole lot at the beginning.
Sure.
The hospital that David was transferred to was about 2.5, 3 hours away from our home, so
Okay.
it took us a while to get there. When we got there, he was in the tub room, they call it. That's where they do cleaning and do the initial wound care and things like that. And then afterwards, that's where the burn patients go every single day to get cleaned up and wound care done. But he was in there for several hours before the burn surgeon came out and told me. They use a statistic at the time. They take David's age and then add that to the percentage that his body was burned, and that gives you the chances of death. It's not very hopeful,
Wow.
I'll just say. And so at the time, David was 31, and he was burned 94% of his body. And so I'm not really good at math. We laugh about that. But that was a 125% chance that my husband was going to die.
Wow.
And so they gave you that statistic over and over again as well, just to be real. That's just how they deal with it. And
Was
so
there at least but he
No.
could survive? There was nothing like that?
not at the beginning.
But there was the but. He's got to have inhalation damage.
They really thought that David had lung damage as well, and it turns out David held his breath. He had heard a story as a young child about a man who had his house was on fire, went and opened the bedroom door and gulped, gasped, and the fire went in and singed his lungs, and that's pretty much what had killed him. And so, subconsciously, David remembered that when he jumped off the ladder, he held his breath. So it's stop, drop, roll, and hold your breath.
There you go, folks.
Yeah,
Write that down. Hold your breath, too. Wow.
Yeah, and so the doctors were just very skeptical those first few days, waiting to see what damage would have been done to the lungs because he was burned so severely. And
So the
by God's
doctors-
grace, there was nothing.
So it sounded like there was not even little hope. There was no hope
Right.
for you to recover.
It was a dark time,
Oh,
dark
wow.
place.
So how did you get through this dark time, this dark place?
One day at a time. Somebody early on told us it was going to be a roller coaster ride. And what they didn't tell me is that the roller coaster was going to come by over and over and over again every single day. It was like you never got off of the roller coaster. It was just a constant influx of how he was responding to meds or procedures or infections that would just pop up. The skin
How
is
well
your
I'd
largest.
slept the night before.
Right, yeah. So it was just a really day by day for 4 months.
4 months.
We were at the BICU.
And you were away from your children for all 4 months, correct?
Correct. We got to see them on occasion.
Yeah.
My dad was retired at the time, and so came down to Texas and stayed with our children, which was a huge blessing.
Oh, yeah.
To know that they were being taken care of by somebody that loved them. And but that was hard in its own right, being away from your kids and trying to comfort them from afar and trying to answer questions when your little girl asks if her dad's going to be okay, if her dad's going to live, and not to be able to just hug her and say, yes, everything's going to be fine. So just trying to balance truth with comfort at the same time was a difficult task.
In your book, a big part of your book, you mentioned your faith and helping you out. I'm curious to know your faith before this accident and after this accident. Were you, and this is too personal, that's fine, we can move on.
fine.
But were you in every Sunday church, going to church every Sunday kind of family before? Or tell us about the before faith and the after faith, I guess is what I'm getting at.
My faith, I grew up in a church, so I always had attended, had given my life to God in high school. So that was just always a part of our life, but didn't necessarily have a very deep relationship. Didn't have a close relationship with Jesus, type of a thing. So Carly and I actually had met in church here in Hastings at First United Methodist, and we were both helping with the youth group at the time. So, that was kind of our before. Since the accident, we relied just on faith in the hospital. That was
It kind of
that was all
felt
we
on some
had.
days that that's all we had left. Our children were away from us. Dave's health was, we didn't know if David was going to survive on a daily basis. So I felt like I had lost my husband. I wasn't living at home. I was living 3 hours away at a condo. I had given up my job because I couldn't be both places. So it felt like everything was slipping away, and just the certainty and the safety net of that American dream that we had before. And so it felt like our faith was all we had. And it felt like some days that we knew that we were being prayed for by so many people because we had a strength that was unexplainable, so it was just an interesting time.
Back in '99, email was out.
Yeah, it just came out that
Yeah,
time,
Yeah, it was
was
just in that
new.
time frame. It was just starting to become prevalent at home. Industry had it, but it wasn't necessarily in everybody's house. quite yet. It was just getting to that point. And our church started an email prayer chain.
Within hours of the accident. The first one went out within hours, just saying, David was in an explosion, please pray. And
so that email prayer chain allowed people to know specifically what to pray, because the emails would go out every day or every few days, telling people what was going on.
And we were transplants. We were living in Texas, and our families were in Indiana and in Minnesota, and we had people all over the country from David's job and different things. And so we had people from all over the place that would respond to the emails and get asked to be put on that list that would receive the emails all the time. China, different countries, people were praying for us. We got an envelope one time in the mail. We would get cards and tons of cards from people we didn't know. And one day it was an envelope with a check for like $20 from somebody I didn't know, and she wrote a note. It was a telemarketer that happened to call our house, and I think my dad was in desperate need of adult conversation. So shared our story with this person on the phone, and the person felt led to like write us a note and send us $20. So it's not every day you get money from a telemarketer.
No, and I'm sure the telemarketer is like, it's not every day somebody wants to talk to me. Wow.
Exactly.
This guy actually wants to talk to me.
Yeah.
That's a great story. What else have you learned about yourselves from this process?
It's pushed us to grow a lot in our faith, to have that closer relationship with each other and with Christ. And it's taught us the difference between happiness and joy. Because we learned early on that happiness is very circumstantial, that, I'll get that new car, that new job, the new house, and then I'll be happy. Well, as soon as you move into that new house or you get that new car, it's no longer new anymore. New technology comes out and all of a sudden you need that next new thing again. And just learn that joy is what you can really rely upon. And part of that joy is, our salvation. And part of it is just that attitude that, we've still been blessed in many ways, each and every day. Even though it looked bleak many days, that we could choose joy. And just work with that.
You would think that the hospital situation, like the family room, waiting room, would just be this, doom and gloom, after 4 months, which is what we were struggling with and not knowing for certain what was going to happen with our future. But it wasn't. It was a place where people were still laughing, and we would sing praise songs, and we would connect with people. We tried to focus on the little things that would bring us joy, whether it was just David wiggling his toes, or the ventilator came off for a few hours before it had to go back on, or just some of those kinds of things that we just tried. And David, we're a quirky bunch, and he had such a positive attitude that helped us be able to deal with what was going on as well. It helped our children, it helped the people around us. He would joke around early on, right after he got the tubes out of him, just days, a week maybe after, and he would start being able to talk, and was adamant he wanted a telephone in his room, and we're like, what do you want a telephone for, David? And finally one of the nurses said, David, who would you call if you had a phone? And he said, Ghostbusters. It was just like silly things like that we just tried to still find reasons to laugh. Laughter is good medicine sometimes.
Wow. You mentioned 125% chance of you not surviving, but here you are. So I'd like to hear at what point did they start believing? At what point did it turn around? How long did it take?
They told us that we could not let our guard down until David was actually out of the burn unit. And David was doing really, really well. November came, Thanksgiving was getting close, and we actually got to go look at some rehab places to move him to. And so we were thinking, oh, this is great, we'll be out of the hospital by Christmas, but in rehab. And then David made a turn for the worse within days, and we almost lost him again. We had to call family back in. Doctors didn't know what was going on, and it ended up being a horrible reaction to some medications that he was on. But again, so it was this roller coaster ride of not knowing for certain until we were out of that place whether he was going to make it. And so finally, after that, after Thanksgiving, he came out of that and got a little bit stronger. But at that point, he couldn't sit up, he couldn't stand up, you couldn't do anything.
Had very limited
your
range
own.
of motion, so couldn't move my joints, as much as normal people could.
Right. So we went to the rehab. After 4 months, we moved him to a rehab hospital that was only a half an hour away from our house. So that was nice. I was able to stay at home with the kids at night and then go there during the day. And that's where David learned how to walk and feed himself. And with assistance, we had crazy little tools and adaptive devices, but just started to be able to see that light was at the end of the tunnel and it wasn't a train, coming at us. But
I haven't heard that one before. That's a good one.
yeah,
I
a
like
nurse
that.
told us that actually, but that there was hope that we would see him home again.
I like that. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train.
Right, right.
What was the most challenging part for you, David, in this whole process?
It was challenging trying to get back to and understand what the new normal was. I would guess is what I would say was the hardest part. Because I looked a little bit different then than I had before. Couldn't do things that I had done before. So some things it was just a matter of, I'm an engineer, so it was just a matter of figuring out ways to adapt to what hands I had left, so I could be able to do that. But part of it then was also figuring out how to get back out into public. Because by looking different, you get asked questions. Fortunately, Carly was able to make a connection with a group called the Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors. And they hold an annual conference once a year. It happened to be about 11 months out from my accident. So we were desperately searching for information and decided to go to San Francisco where this conference was at.
And we learned really valuable tools of just how to share a short story, just a 1 or 2 sentence thing.
When somebody asks you at the grocery store, what happened to you?
Right.
You have that short story, I was burnt, but I'm doing fine now. Or if that person's follows up with another question, or you can tell they're very sincere, you might have a longer story that would explain, a little bit more of what the process had been, what we'd gone through.
And then when somebody says, Shazam, what happened to you? Were you attacked by a bear? You know that you can just say, no, it's leprosy, or you can just be stupid back to
Just
them
make
if they.
something back,
We
That's a
think
good
people
strategy.
need to earn your story, that
Yeah.
they don't just deserve it sometimes. And some people are a lot more sympathetic or sensitive, I should say, than others. So.
Is that something you've gotten used to, is going on public and getting the looks once in a while? I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
How would you say as society, since you first started able to get out and go out in public to now, has society changed at all as far as being more accepting and not being so many looks, or is it about the same? I'm curious about that.
It's probably about the same.
Okay.
We've probably changed more
Yeah.
than we've seen society
Okay.
change. We aren't nearly as sensitive about
Yeah.
stares, and we just kind of do whatever we want to do and don't let any of that get in our way.
Yeah.
David goes to water parks with just his swim trunks on. We get lots of looks. We clear hot tubs out really fast. We say we laugh.
Oh, really?
It's just kind of, we use it to our advantage whenever we can.
It's a little warm in here. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez.
So.
Wow. Well, what a great attitude, and wow, how strong you guys are, I gotta say. Wow. And it's all you guys. Finally, let's plug the book, shall we?
Okay.
The whole reason
Sounds
why. Walk Through Fire here. Here, we'll go on this camera here. Walk Through Fire. You guys co-authored with your story and the story you have with the tragedy and getting over it. Available on Amazon, by the way. Add that. How did real quickly? But we do need to wrap this up. But real quickly, how did the idea of doing a book come about?
It's kind of been in the back of my mind for many years, but then I would always doubt that I had the capabilities of doing it. And David was always very encouraging for me to write the story. We met with
I'm an engineer, so I don't write.
That's what he says. But we've always said that an injury like this doesn't just affect the person who was hurt. It has affected our entire family, and not just our immediate family, but our extended family and friends as well. And so I think we met with an agent last summer who just said this needs to be written from both of our perspectives, just because we dealt with the same situation, but we dealt with it in very different ways. And so the book is kind of broken up with David and I go back and forth in each chapter telling the same story, but from our perspectives. And our goal was just to provide hope and encouragement to somebody else that might not be a burn injury that somebody's facing, but everybody in life faces struggles or tragedy or pain of one form or another. And so can our story give them some hope or encouragement for what they're facing?
Wow.
And we're doing a book signing Saturday.
Yes, for those that see this before Saturday, yes, you guys have books. Tell us about that real quickly. When and
November
where?
21st, it's down in downtown Hastings at Rachel Marthaler Photography Studio from 2:30 to 4, and we'll have books for sale, and we'll be signing books. So if
Great.
you're available, come out and see us.
Great. And real quickly, and you guys are former Hastings residents, but now again you're in Indiana.
Correct.
Catch us up to speed. What are you up to now?
David's retired, so we are into a little bit of everything. Right now, everything's revolving around a book
I'm sure,
and things like that. But and we're starting a speaking ministry. So again,
wow.
sharing our story to church groups or organizations or whatnot. So we're starting that.
We just became empty nesters. Our son started college this fall. So
Yeah, our youngest.
Congratulations.
And so we're trying to kind of figure out what's next.
what's next?
Nice.
So, yep.
Great. Well, thank you both
Thank
for coming
you.
in and sharing your
Thank you
story.
Appreciate it.
A remarkable story. I'm so glad you shared it.
Thank you.
And again, their book right here, Walk Through Fire, available on Amazon. Right there. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on In Studio. We'll see you next time.